The long-running corruption allegations against South African telecoms giant MTN has now reached the country's highest court, the Constitutional Court. This follows years of legal wrangling with Turkish mobile operator Turkcell, which alleges that MTN secured Iran's mobile license at its expense by bribing Iranian officials. MTN has consistently dismissed the claims. Turkcell's legal efforts have faltered elsewhere. In the UK, no trial was brought forward, and in the US, Turkcell withdrew its case after a Supreme Court ruling narrowed the scope of the legislation under which it had filed. But the issue is far from over, especially in Washington, where a Congresswoman is now putting pressure on South Africa. Well, joining us in the National Security News studio is Joshua Meservey, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute, to talk about the renewed political heat MTN is facing in the US. Hi, Joshua. Nice again to see you.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for having me on.
So, what's the latest pressure from Washington regarding MTN's alleged ties to Iranian entities?
Well, I think this is an issue that is gaining more and more prominence in Washington. So it's been on the radar for a while. Both because, I would say primarily because of South Africa. It's the very strong affinity that it expresses for Tehran and the Iranian regime. So that stirred curiosity, let's say, in Washington. And so there's been some scrutiny on why exactly that relationship is so strong. And MTN is emerging as part of the story. It appears, you referenced the Turkcell case that was filed it's been filed in a number of places, but including in a federal district court in the United States. I've read some of those documents. I didn't read the whole thing because very long, but I read some of it, and within those documents, they claim to reproduce internal MTN communications, memos, but also emails back and forth between Iranian officials and MTN officials that are pretty damning if they are indeed true, and authentic communications, let's say. So this is an issue, as I say, that's been more and more on the American radar. Especially following also the October 7th attacks, because the Iran links to South Africa became much more relevant, obviously to Israel, but also to the United States. So there's been efforts to figure out exactly what's going on here, what are the nature of the links, and MTN, as I said, is emerging as a potentially a key entity in this inquiry.
So, who is the Congresswoman who has now, was it filed a complaint or to one of the banks?
So this is Elise Stefanik, who, as I'm sure we remember, was originally President Trump's nominee to be the American ambassador to the United Nations. Now, she withdrew her nomination in part because, I think in large part, because Republicans have such a small majority in the House of Representatives where she sits. So if she had taken that position, it would have been one less vote for Republicans, and the Trump administration decided that it didn't want to do that, to play with such narrow margins. So she has very strong links to the Trump administration, and she has written a letter to several banks expressing concern about their potential links. I don't want to get into any sort of legalities or anything like that, so I'll say it's potential and alleged and et cetera. So, but potential links to sanctioned Iranian entities. But specifically, also MTN is referenced in that letter as being a potential sort of liaison or entity that is facilitating illicit transactions, or is involved in illicit behavior, I should say, sanctioned behavior from the American perspective with the Iranian regime.
So, what does she want to happen?
She wants an investigation. She wants the banks to, I think, to look into it themselves. Reading the letter, and I read it when it came out, so it's been a few days. But it struck me as very much a warning to these banks that they needed to very diligently ensure that they are not engaging in behavior that violates American sanctions, essentially.
Have the banks responded?
I don't know. Not that I've seen. I suspect they are scrambling dramatically, and I am sure there's an army of lawyers gathered around a table right now, parsing the letter, and also hopefully they are doing internal inquiries to figure out what their vulnerabilities are, and then moving very quickly to eliminate those vulnerabilities if they exist.
Well, could it escalate into hearings or even legislative action?
Possibly, very very hard to assess. Again, obviously, Representative Stefanik is a congresswoman, so she certainly has certain powers that to introduce legislation. I think the bigger danger here for MTN and the banks is that she is obviously close to the Trump administration, so she could um, keep the administration informed of her activities and what she finds out. And the executive branch has the power to move much more quickly than the legislative branch in the American system. Uh, so I think that would be the more clear and present danger, let's say.
Well, it seems that the Trump administration has cooled a little bit on South Africa following that meeting between Trump and Ramaphosa. Where is South Africa right now with the Trump administration?
Yeah, I think they are right where I and others have consistently said they are. The meeting between President Ramaphosa and President Trump at the Oval Office was it was not decisive, let's say. It left many issues wide open that needed to be addressed by the South Africans. My fear is that the South Africans interpreted what happened as a reset, that things were okay now. They just simply needed to come up with some sort of investment and trade deal with the United States, and everything would be hunky dory, as we say here in the U.S. That would suffice. That's simply not the case. The the political issues that lie at the hearts of the problems between the United States and South Africa, the decisions that the South African government and the ANC have made for decades, frankly, but especially recently, continue to irritate this relationship and make it very difficult to have anything resembling a normal and mutually productive relationship. Those issues have to be addressed. The administration, so I hosted this Afrikaner delegation at Hudson Institute that you referenced. I also speak somewhat regularly with people within the Trump administration, and the demands that the Afrikaner delegation conveyed from the administration to the South African government are indeed accurate. Those did come from the administration, and the administration is concerned about them and wants them addressed. So again, I think it would be a huge mistake for the South Africans to believe that just a trade and investment package of some sort would be the final bow on top of a renewed and normal relationship. That's just not accurate.
Well, it's close to the deadline when the new tariffs kick in. So, what's going to happen on that date?
I don't know. The various countries, because again, this is a global issue. Let's remember, it's not simply South Africa that's facing tariffs. I know a number of countries are requesting for extensions on tariffs. And I think also, the Afrikaner delegation really did South Africa a solid, because it came and it explained how damaging tariffs would be to really important economic sectors within South Africa. It also advocated strongly for AGOA, and I think it was heard within the administration. Now, that doesn't mean, obviously, that there will be any sort of shift in policy, but at least that message was heard loudly and clearly, I think, within the administration, and certainly the delegation was at great pains to send that message. So again, I think I'm sure this is not the case, but the South African government should be grateful, I would say, to this Afrikaner delegation for sending that message so firmly, or clearly, I should say. And so we'll have to see. My understanding is that the South African government has not been able to put together a package or a plan that would avoid the tariff issue, that would placate the administration sufficiently to avoid tariffs. Um, so maybe they will get an extension. If they don't, then the South African economy, sadly, is going to really suffer.
Well, can we talk about Mcebisi Jonas? He wasn't at that meeting between Ramaphosa and Trump. We probably kept him away for a very good reason, so that the fire is not on him. Not that it helped, but and he's also linked to MTN. So, have you seen him in Washington? Has anybody seen him in Washington? What is the position of Mr. Jonas?
I have not seen him in Washington. I don't believe he has traveled to Washington since being announced as the envoy. Yeah, he's the chairman, obviously, of MTN, and MTN, as we discussed right at the beginning, has become a greater and greater concern in Washington because of the Iran links and the potential that MTN technology and technologies were used by the IRGC, including the Quds Force, which is the terrorist arm of the Iranian military, including potentially to facilitate the October 7th attacks. That's an extraordinarily um, dangerous. If MTN's technology was really used in this way, I don't need to explain to your audience the potential ramifications of that if the link is really strongly established. So I think because of that potential bomb around or that potential problem regarding MTN, it's going to be very hard for Jonas to be received in Washington. The risks are just too great right now for any sort of American official. So I don't know what the South African government plans to do about Jonas. When their envoy to the United States is unlikely to be able to get meetings in the United States. That's a question for Pretoria, obviously.
And also, there's MTN in the South African government, but in this case, they're very closely linked because Ramaphosa also used to be associated with MTN.
Well, yes. So Ramaphosa was the chairman of MTN when MTN won the contracts to control 49% of Iran cell. Now, I hesitated when I say won because the crux of the lawsuit that Turkcell has filed against MTN alleges that MTN bribed its way into winning that contract, into getting the Iranian officials to switch the contract that Turkcell claims it had won to MTN. Again, when you read the documents within that Turkcell lawsuit, at least the one that was filed in the district court in the United States, which is the one I've looked at, and I assume it's been the same in other places. The documents, as I already said, are damning if they are real, because it does lay out very explicitly the quid pro quo between MTN and Iran. And this is to your point about MTN being a really important South African company and connected at the highest levels of power within the South African government. Part of the quid pro quo is that MTN would use its connections to the South African government to get the South African government to diplomatically support Iran and protect it in some ways against UN actions, for instance, condemning its nuclear program and such things. So that, again, that quid pro quo, part of it was premised on the idea that MTN has access to the most senior decision makers within the South African government, which is still the case, obviously. Mcebisi Jonas, by all accounts, is quite close to President Ramaphosa, and MTN is such an important South African company, that it makes sense that they would have that type of political influence.
So, Josh, to sort of summarize what you said, there seems to be an understanding of the Trump administration of the damage that tariffs, possible sanctions even, or whatever could cause. But they're still determined to see change in South Africa. And, all these things like MTN still puts the pressure is not gone. Is that what you say?
I think that's accurate. Yeah. This is the sad state of the relationship because of how the South African government has behaved for so long and the ANC. It's really woven this tangled web that they are now stuck to in some ways, or tangled up in, because I think the U.S. genuinely would absolutely love to have a robust economic partnership with South Africa. There's so much both countries could do together. The private sector in the United States is so interested in South Africa, but looming over all of that and dampening and suppressing all of that are the political decisions that the South African government has taken that are highly antagonistic to the United States. They continue to do it, by the way. And they continue to never miss an opportunity to express their solidarity and support for the theocratic dictatorship in Tehran, and to thumb their nose essentially at the United States. So that just makes it impossible, for the United States, as I've said, to have even a normal relationship, much less a close relationship, with a country like South Africa.
Well, Joshua Meservey from Hudson Institute, thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda. Always a pleasure.